listeners, and welcome to another Footnote episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm Chris Holliday.
And today, Chris, we're tackling the subject of Synthespians, a subject that I am delighted to delegate to you because I know it's something you've been writing on and thinking about for quite a lot over the last few years. So, you start us off. What is a Synthespian?
Okay, so synthespian is essentially a combination of synthetic and thespian, and it has, so on the one hand, it's a sort of play with words. It comes as part, I guess, of a number of different ways that scholars, it's certainly, it's a critical term as much as an industry term. I think it sort of wavers between the two, but is sort of, something that I think the industry is familiar with as much as kind of film scholars. And it's a term, or it's a label that designates a particular kind of artificial, falsified, computer-generated performer, perhaps sitting alongside words like avatar and proxy. And there are other words that sort of float around which we can kind of talk about. The cyberstar is a good example. Lisa Bode has written a lot about kind of Teflon stars and what she calls shadow citizens. So it's sort of doing a number of things. One, it's speaking to a kind of collision between the human and performance, and the kind of quote-unquote crisis of performance in the age of digital reproduction, let's say. It's a term that is part of a number of different ways that scholars and I think the industry have spoken about this collision, but it's also sort of, I guess, historically located in that it kind of comes to prominence late 90s, early 2000s around sort of motion capture. So it's doing lots and lots of different things, has its own kind of interesting kind of history, but today the synthespian is sort of been re-emerged because of AI and AI performance and a particular character, which I will, performer, I should say, which I will come on to. So it's essentially an industry and kind of critical label that is designating perhaps a shift in the way we have to think about acting, or at least acting a performance that is created or co-created by a computer.
Right, so it's acting, is it actors acting on computers, or is it computers acting as actors, or is it a bit of both?
It's a bit of both, but it's mostly the former. So it's essentially the creation of, and a good example would be Final Fantasy. So the character of Aki Ross in the computer animated film Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, is often considered to be the first synthespian, i.e. it's a character that is given a life. Well, I was going to say given a life off screen, which is not kind of the case, but there's a sort of a shift that happens between kind of Toy Story and Buzz and Woody and all those kinds of characters, and then Aki Ross, which is considered. Aki Ross appeared on social media, was interviewed on various platforms. There was a desire to sort of create the illusion that she was a performer that was acting as kind of Aki Ross. And I know that in our episodes before, with our conversation on Mickey Mouse with David McGowan, we talked a little bit about this kind of extra textual illusion, but this is a kind of computer generated star essentially. So it's the creation of a kind of three-dimensional computer-generated character that is able to act in a way that is approximating kind of human performance. So Tom Hanks very famously kind of said in response to the Polar Express that there will be a world in which you don't need actors anymore. Of course, we could complicate that and talk about that in relation to AI and voices and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, it's computers being able to create a convincing performance. And I should also say that it's very... So it goes back to the late 1990s and an article that was published in the Los Angeles Times about a company, I think it was called Virtual Productions Limited or something like that, where they were going to produce a computer-generated replica of Marlene Dietrich for use in a museum. And in response to that, Barbara Creed wrote a very famous article published in Screen in 2000 called Beyond the Cyberstar, which was essentially, there might be now artificial we might see a future in which it's not actually Marlene Dietrich, it's existing stars, it's completely falsified characters or performers that will ascend to the level of stardom. So she essentially talks about digital replication, the advancement in computer graphics, and says that there is going to be a world where it's not just resurrecting Gene Kelly or Marlene Dietrich, or although that has happened, there will be we can see a future here where there are performances that are entirely generated by computer, and there are performers that have kind of off-screen lives. Fast forward 30 years, and we've got recently announced in Variety there was a performer called Tilly Norwood, who is an entirely computer-generated AI performer. So this is the return of the cyberstar, which is they can work under particular conditions. They never get tired. They don't have to be kind of contracted in the same way. There is an attraction, and there's also a kind of politics to this, which is, of course, the first instance that Hollywood producers got to create an artificial cyberstar. In this, through AI, they picked a young blonde white woman that they were able to control, and anyway, there's another story to that. So Synthespian is sort of being I suppose is a discourse that's being revised at the moment because of AI, but it very much has its roots in that kind of late 90s, early 2000 period, where there was the emergence of the computer animated film, there was the acceleration of motion capture, and there were, I guess, companies, studios, production facilities starting to play with the idea of both resurrecting and kind of scanning, using footage to kind of create these three-dimensional models of deceased stars, and also maybe thinking about how that technology could be used to create entirely computer-generated performances, bodies that might one day ascend to the level of a Tom Cruise, but they are essentially falsified bodies.
Okay, so the concern here is, well, there's lots of potential concerns, but picking up on your point about Tilly Norwood being someone that would never get tired. Obviously, she wouldn't, because she's a synthespian or an artificial creation, but her designers, her prompt creators, her all this stuff would get tired. I guess my question is this an anxiety purely from a kind of actorly perspective of, oh my God, humans are being replaced on screen by things that are not on screen? Is there any, because it's not a question of replacement of labour so much as a question of shifting of labour, or is it? It's just interesting you said that. I know there have been pieces written on things adjacent to this about like motion capture that have talked about, we have this tendency to think only about what's going on that we can see on screen, but actually there's a hell of a lot of labour, culture, work, creativity, things to be concerned about, things to be praised off screen. So I didn't want us to necessarily fall down that trap completely.
Yeah. So, the stuff that I've been working on at the moment is about almost the opposite of this, which is the contribution, like the digital replication of stars, existing stars that come with the cultural kind of connotation, or come with the weight of an existing star. And actually, Tilly Norwood, in some ways, represents a callback to the stage before, so it returns us. I'm really interested in my work in the stuff we did around Aber Voyage, so the kind of deep fake panic of 2018, 2019, up to stars being willingly part of a set of processes where they can be youthened, they can perform on stage without having to kind of exert their body and exert their labour. Tilly Norwood's interesting because she takes us back to kind of the origins of this, which is not about the replication of stars. It's almost the bit before stars realised that there was sort of potential for this kind of technology. It takes us back to those kinds of questions of kind of trust and exploitation and labour. And actually, in the case of Tilly Norwood, the point that you raised, so the SAG-AFTRA, so the Screen Actors Guild, talked about Tilly Norwood and immediately kind of released a statement that essentially said, we need to think very carefully about the creativity is and should remain human-centered, and the quote, Tilly Norwood is not an actor, it's a character generated by a computer program that was trained on the work of countless professional performers. So Tilly Norwood is kind of exacerbating a set of debates around, as you said, that sort of transplant of occlusion of labour, the marginalisation of labour, but it's in two places. One, there's the AI debate, which is AI is taking away the work of kind of artists and trained animators and visual effects artists because this stuff can be generated automatically, and also that the AI is trained.
Can I pause you there? It can't be trained automatically. It can be trained and it can be used, and I certainly will take the point that 100 animators might be replaced by 10, 5, 1 person using AI, but it can't be trained automatically. So I'm just a bit worried. Is this just a concern? The SAG thing is an actor's concern. Should you be as concerned about this if you're a visual effects artist?
Yes, so I think so. What I was going to say is that it's when I say trained automatically, it's that it's trained on the work of existing visual effects artists. The AI is trained on the work of existing performers, so that it can undertake its processes automatically, if you see what I mean. So there's two parts to this. Whereas it's being trained on the work of kind of visual effects artists. And we talked about this in the AI and animation, or we, depending on when this episode goes out, there are discussions that we have had about AI and animation and about exploitation and all that kind of stuff. So
it's coming, listeners. It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming. There you go. So the perils of podcast recording. But there is something to be said around whose labour is being exploited. Motion capture, as you said, was very interested as a set of discourses around the denial of the animator's labour, the assumption that the computer was just creating this performance, and we spend, as you said, too much time placing emphasis on the star performer, where there's a number of production workflows and processes and pipelines that are being denied because of the prominence of an Andy Serkis, for example. So Mihaela has written about this, Tanine Allison has written about this. With AI, there's the same but sort of different. One is, so the computer, you click a button and it has the ability to remove the work of 200 animators. Like there's that kind of anxiety. But the other anxiety is the existing work that is out there by certain animators or visual effects artists, or the performances of Tom Cruise that exist on these are now raw material that can be used without the without being sanctioned by these artists to create these artificial processes. So deepfake artists do this. They find a bunch of images of Tom Cruise or of Freddie Mercury, and then they scan it in and they create their deepfakes, which are entirely unlicensed, and they are bottom-up processes. The anxiety around Tilly Norwood is it's replicating those processes, but from the top down. So now there's suddenly this artist there's now this performer that's being created, and of course a number of Hollywood artists, Emily Blunt is one, Melissa Barrera is another, that basically said, is this work now going to take away our roles for us? Like, this person can stay at the same age. This is relatively new. Tilly Norwood comes out in September, I think, 2025. So this is a relatively recent sort of thing, but it's reigniting a set of debates that are unresolved. Exactly as you said, around whose labour is being exploited, the different kinds of the things that one can do with this artist, and the ethics behind it as well.
Okay, we are completely out of time, but I will give you 20 seconds to say cite anything you need to cite to help people who wish to learn more about Synthespians. So
I would say anything by Tanine Allison. There is a piece that she's written relatively recently on the AI actor in a JCMS, Journal of Cinema and Media Studies dossier, edited by Misha. Barbara Creed's article Beyond the Cyberstar. And depending on when this episode goes out, myself and Sarah Thomas's new book, Smart Stardom, Advanced Technology and Digital Replication of Celebrity, or something like that. Advanced Digital Technologies and the Replication of Celebrity, which will be out soon, but it kind of negotiates some of these debates.
Okay, we will mention that book on the podcast again, I am sure, in the coming few months to a year.
Hurrah!
Listeners, right now it's you've just had a little tease there of what our very old Dr. Holiday's been up to when he hasn't been talking to me. But speaking of what he's got to get up to when he's not talking to me, we've got to go now. So thanks very much for listening. That was another Footnote episode. You can suggest future episodes at Fananim Research, FANANIM Research @gmail.com. Otherwise, we'll see you next time.
Bye.